All right, let's look at the last question, question 3. That's referred to as the argument prompt or the open response in some cases. But again, it gives you your little information about how long you should take and things like that. This particular prompt is a little bit different from some of the more common ones because it does provide quite a bit of context. So let's start with that. Authors Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman published The Creativity Crisis in Newsweek.com in July 2010. They reported that the Torrance test, a test of creativity that has been administered to millions of people worldwide in 50 languages, indicates that the public's creativity quotient has steadily crept downward since 1990. In their article, Bronson and Merriman cite the claims of Professor Kyoyoung-hee Kim at the College of William and Mary. It's very clear, and the decrease is very significant. Kim reports that it's the scores of younger children in America from kindergarten through 6th grade for whom the decline is most serious. Bronson and Merriman state that the potential consequences are sweeping. The necessity of human ingenuity is undisputed. A recent IBM poll of 1,500 CEOs identified creativity as the #1 leadership competency of the future. Yet it's not just about sustaining our nation's economic growth. All around us are matters of national and international importance that are crying out for creative solutions, from saving the Gulf of Mexico to bringing peace to Afghanistan to delivering health care. Such solutions emerge from a healthy marketplace of ideas sustained by a populace constantly contributing original ideas and receptive to the ideas of others. So like I said, that's kind of the context, the need for creativity in society, kind of pointing out why we need it, both in the workplace, in the economy, as well as in overall global issues. So let's read the last sentence here. One possible approach to this reputed decline in creativity is to explicitly teach creative thinking in schools. Write to your school board explaining what you mean by creativity and arguing for or against the creation of a class in creativity. So there's a few things to unpack here. First of all, this second sentence is where we kind of get our task. But what's really important and why it's italicized is this word "and." Because not only do we need to say what do we mean by creativity, we argue for or against the creation of the class. So anytime there is an "and," make sure you circle it, mark it, note it, because if it's in that task sentence, it's going to be very relevant to your prompt. The other thing is most of the argument essays also have this same kind of setup as the synthesis ones, the well-developed essay that evaluates blank, blank, blank. This one is a bit of an anomaly in terms of prompts, so it's a little bit different, but it's usually pretty easy to identify that sentence that is asking for what they want. And usually, like I said, it's going to be right around here. So, that said, our task is two-part. One, we need to define what creativity is, and then we have to argue for or against the creation of a class. So, before I kind of go into developing a thesis, I'm going to kind of start with my pieces, because I think my first paragraph, I need to define what creativity is. That's the first part of the task. And then I will give my reasons for or against the creation of a class in creativity. Now, just off the cuff, I don't really have a very strong opinion about this topic, so this is a great time to use my PEEPS acronym. So the first one is talking about pragmatic issues. So with a creativity class, some of the pragmatic things to consider are: what does the curriculum even look like? Who teaches it? We can think about scheduling is a factor. Other pragmatic things, I guess, the challenge of making something abstract, concrete, is a pragmatic issue. Then I'm going to think about it economically. The addition of this class is going to incur costs in supplies, teachers, any necessary training, so that's something to consider in this argument. But it also pointed out that in the prompt, remember, it was saying that CEOs are looking for this, and that the leadership skills necessary for successful business are tied to creativity. So I'm going to tie the need for a creativity class to economy and progress. And then ethically, we can think about this class in creativity in terms of how fair it is to even assess something like creativity. We can say that we might have a moral responsibility, because remember, the prompt was saying that big issues such as healthcare, saving the Gulf of Mexico, and bringing peace in Afghanistan, all of those are going to require creativity. So do we have a moral responsibility to resolve those issues via creativity classes? Just another way of thinking about it ethically. And then psychologically, I can think about it in terms of added stress. Or it might also be a stress reliever for some students. It could possibly make students feel more mentally prepared for the workplace, seeing as the prompt mentioned that CEOs are looking for that in general. So that's a psychological effect. And then sociological is kind of a combination of some of the things we've already talked about, because we talked about the economic progress. That would be a societal impact. We talked about solving world issues, and those would also be sociological effects. So that said, what I've just done here, my peeps, is really just kind of a way to brainstorm through some of the pros and cons that might exist surrounding an issue. And what that does is it gives me a wider range of how I might approach this question. So for example, based on this, I think what is compelling to me are kind of the cons. This pragmatic and the cost are kind of detrimental to me. So I would think my thesis then would be that a class in creativity would be logistically infeasible and expensive. Therefore, it should not be required. So look at that example for a second here and try to think about if you think that is an open or a closed thesis. A class in creativity would be logistically infeasible and expensive. Therefore, it should not be required. That is an example of a closed thesis because of this right here. Those are what become my main body paragraphs, right? So that said, in my thesis, I have previewed. I didn't necessarily say I'm going to talk about blank, blank, and blank, because one, you should never write a thesis that way. But two, I did allude to the two main arguments that I'm going to make. So this is another example of a closed thesis. Now, if I were to say something simply along the lines of a course in creativity should never be required of a high school student, period, that's an example of that open thesis. I'm still stating my defensible opinion, but I'm not previewing the arguments that I'm going to make. So from there, like we said, I'm going to start by defining what creativity is. That's the first piece of my line of reasoning. Then I'm going to talk about how it's infeasible or impractical. And then I'm going to talk about the cost to kind of build my argument against this creation of a class in creativity. So that's kind of my review of how I would approach developing a thesis for each of these questions. I hope you have a little bit better idea between what an open thesis and a closed thesis looks like at this point, and a few of the strategies I use to kind of think through what I'm trying to get at. But just to review, With synthesis, remember that you have to have, let me get a different highlighter color from what we've used. Things to remember is that your argument needs to be the focus of that essay, so make sure that even before you look at the sources, you start by creating your opinion or stating your opinion in a thesis statement. This one, again, remember, is an example of an open thesis because I haven't previewed anything, but it is defensible. Then, the big thing with rhetorical analysis is right here, making sure, especially, you have the purpose lined out. That would be an open thesis. But if you preview the different strategies you're going to talk about, you would have a closed thesis, like we have here at the bottom. And then finally, when we're looking at the argument prompt, make sure we're always looking for those ands or those two-part tasks. And then, when necessary, using our PEEPS acronym to kind of walk through the different opinions that might exist out there. That is my model of how to develop thesis statements for the 3 different questions. If you have questions, please let me know.